I know that February is the shortest month, but wow, did it fly by. Which obviously means it's time to do another monthly reading wrap up. I read 6 books in February, so stick around as I tell you what each one's about, what I rated them, and what I liked and disliked about them. And if you're new, hi, welcome, I'm Katerina, it's nice to see you here. I make new videos every week yapping about books, and if that's your jam, why not subscribe? Okay, so the very first book I kicked off last month with was Minor Detail by adania Shibli, who is a Palestinian author, and I read the translated version by Elizabeth Jaquette. This is a short book that's under 150 pages, but wow, does it pack a punch. It's split into 2 parts. The first part recounts Israeli soldiers that are occupying a nearby land in 1949, and here they commit a brutal act against a young Palestinian girl. And the second part occurs decades later, where we follow a different Palestinian woman, and she is devoted in uncovering the truth behind this minor detail in history. And starting off February very strong, I rated this book 4 stars. Talking about this book honestly chokes me up, so praises to the author for writing such a powerful piece, because I'm sure it was incredibly difficult and heart-wrenching for her to do so. It sheds light on the atrocities that Palestinians have faced throughout history and still continue to face today, as it hones in on the awful details of daily life under occupation, how restricted people are, risking their lives just to go to work and see their family. And even though this book was published in 2017, it is initially set in the 1940s and then in the 70s, which just shows how long that Israel's occupation has been in Palestine for. Another aspect for me that I also found so harrowing, that in the book, it talks about places in Palestine that literally no longer exist due to the bombing and genocide from Israel and the West. And this book is really a reminder of the importance of literature, because no matter what the news and other media outlets may try to tell you with their agenda, this book is proof that areas like this once did exist, and this is how they were, and this is what the people that were like there. And it's essentially a snapshot in time of a moment that we will never get back, which is so wild and weird to think about. The only reason I didn't rate this book 5 stars is that I wasn't particularly the biggest fan of the writing style. It started to become overly descriptive on small actions, which over and over again became a bit repetitive to me, which to be honest was probably a choice by the author to show the repetitive nature of life in occupation. But I did feel myself zone out at times when it was purely just describing the actions of the main characters for pages and pages. Whereas I wanted more emotion, I wanted to know what they were feeling. I wanted a deeper dive into what the characters personally thought when they were undergoing certain things. I always felt like I was like arm's length from the character, like I wanted to get closer to them, but they constantly felt like they were at a distance. But apart from that, this is an absolutely amazing book, and it's also a very important read. As I've said before, reading is an act of resistance, and I would implore you to read this book as soon as possible. The second book I read in February was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I picked this up because at the end of January, it was the 80th anniversary of the Auschwitz liberation. And I had this book for a while, but hearing about the anniversary, it finally inspired me to pick this book up and read it. So this is a memoir written by a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and was actually held in Auschwitz. And he essentially explores how the prisoners there found meaning and purpose during their time of suffering. Like the last book, this is also split into 2 parts. The first recounts his own personal time within these concentration camps and how he managed to find hope and meaning during this time to keep him alive. And the second part introduces his own existential theory he developed, which is called logotherapy, which is a psychological approach centered on the human drive in the quest for meaning. And I rated this book 3 stars. Straight away, I absolutely loved the first half. It was incredibly powerful and moving. I actually visited Auschwitz myself back in 2017, and it's genuinely one of the strangest places that I have ever experienced. To hear about the cruelties that millions of people faced was just absolutely horrifying. And it always made me wonder, how do people find the strength to carry on when they're literally enduring the worst fate imaginable? And this book was a literal response to that question, because it was a first-hand experience by a survivor. I particularly thought the author's exploration into the relationships of people within the camps was so interesting, as there would be prisoners that were given higher responsibilities than the others that would be more cruel to their own people than the guards were. And it's such a thought-provoking look into people's psychology and power dynamics and how this affects other people's will. And it has this overall message of, despite having no freedom, humans still have free will towards each other, and this in itself is meaning. However, I would have rated this book higher if it finished after the first half, because the second half kind of fell a bit flat for me. The author's introduction and exploration into logotherapy honestly just kind of read like a textbook. It was very factual and dry, and I found myself zoning out quite often because it was just too technical for me to understand. And it almost took the emotional impact out of the first half by trying to rationalize rationalize it through science. I mean, this is just purely my opinion, but it just felt very clinical, and honestly, it kind of felt like an author's push to promote his own medical research, which would have been fine if this book was titled as an exploration into logotherapy, but it wasn't, so I was therefore expecting it to be a more personal exploration into how he found meaning and hope within these camps, rather than just how the general populace as a whole searches to find meaning, which it did touch upon in the first half of the book, but I felt like it kind of just scratched the surface. I mean, overall, this is still an incredible and powerful book, but I just wish that it focused more on his own personal experiences rather than his psychiatric work. Moving on, as February was also Black History Month, I wanted to branch out and read more Black authors. So the next book I read last month was Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is a dystopian novel that's written in the 90s, but is set in 2024 America, which I must say, it was absolutely crazy reading a book 30 years ago with events that were happening now, because the author was literally a little bit too spot on in predicting the future. As in the book, we witness how climate change and economic collapse has led to societal breakdown and chaos. And in the story, we follow a teenage girl flee her home after her gated community was attacked, and she travels north hoping to find a better life and also meets other people along the way, whilst also telling them about her newfound religion called Earthseed, and she's hoping to form a new community on this. And I rated this book 3.5 stars. Straight off the bat, this book gave me literal chills when I was reading it, because it is the most realistic dystopian novel I have ever read. The concept that there will be no major apocalyptic event that will wipe out the earth in the way that you see in films, but rather a series of many things gone wrong that will cause the breakdown of society. And the fun thing about reading this now, well, maybe actually not fun because it was actually really scary and depressing, is seeing how the novel predicted so many details that we are already beginning to see unfold, such as extreme weather events and climate disasters that result in refugees and mass migration, and how late-stage capitalism is skyrocketing the wealth inequality gap, as poverty is increasing whilst billionaires are launching their own private space programs to flee this dying planet. Like, did I just describe this book 30 years ago, or events that are happening right now? Fires said to be started by arsonists, which have literally been made worse by climate change, happens in this book. Billionaires in government to make more money and promote their friends' space programs, that happens in the book. Late-stage capitalism is causing companies to perform facilitated modern slavery, which is trapping people in jobs. That literally happens in the book. Like, I'm just convinced this author is psychic because this was literally all too accurate. It therefore absolutely kills me not rating this book 5 stars, but the main reason is just because I hated the main character. She has a condition called hyperempathy where she's able to experience other people's pain and pleasure herself. But honestly, this felt like such an unneeded ability. I personally felt like it didn't add anything to the story. And even with this ability, she just was so weirdly unemotional and delivered everything in a matter-of-fact way. I don't want to give spoilers, but there's some serious bad things that happen in this book, and she's just so like, oh, whatever, I've got other things to worry about, so I'll just move on. She was just so at a distance with everything, and I felt like I just couldn't connect with her. I also didn't really like her religion as a solution to all the problems and conflict in the world. Not only did I find the messaging just a bit naff, but it also just felt really like a cult, and I was just kind of rolling my eyes every time it was mentioned. Plus, she's 18 in the book, and there's a bit where she sleeps with a 57-year-old man, and it's like, why? It was so unnecessary to the plot and actually just kind of gross. There is a second book called Parable of the Talents, which I probably will read, but I'm not rushing to pick it up anytime soon. So overall, thoughts on the book, I was very impressed by the political, economic, and social predictions. Reading it honestly just gave me whiplash. But I just liked the main character. She was just too unemotional for me and seemed to have a messiah complex. After 3 very heavy books, I decided to pick up something a little bit more fun and lighthearted. So the next book I read was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. This is a British 70s satirical science fiction novel that follows an ordinary human and his alien friend, who has been stuck on the Earth for years, and he's a writer researching about galaxy hitchhiking. At the start, the Earth gets destroyed. Obviously, it's science fiction in the 70s, and they're both miraculously saved last minute. And the book is essentially their adventure hopping from different spaceships to different planets, and it explores themes in absurdity, the random nature of life, and the search for meaning. And I rated this book 3 stars. I would describe this book as a mix of the space travel from Star Wars, but the humor and quirky characters from Doctor Who. It was just so weird, but in a way that was kind of amusing and witty. It's very much the epitome of like old British humor. It's quite dry and to the point, like the comedy in Monty Python and Only rifles and horses. It's just very aggressively 70s. I also like the way that the author explored existentialism in a satirical way. It weirdly worked well. People always talk about the absurdity of life, and I think that this book neatly summed up what that really means. I totally get why this book had a huge cult following back in the day. I can't imagine any other books back then doing it like this one did, so I'm sure this felt very fresh and new to people. However, I didn't really love it, but I think it's because, in general, I am not a fan of science fiction that's set in space. I felt the same when I read Dune. I found it kind of slow and hard to engage with, which is bizarre because I loved the Dune films and I am a huge Star Wars fan. But now I'm thinking about it, I think I only love space sci-fi in films and TV shows rather than books. And I think I can pinpoint why. I think it's because in my books, I like to empathize with the characters. I like to relate to their situations and put myself in their shoes. But in space sci-fi, on a whole, I can't really relate to a guy trying to jump onto a different spaceship. And I don't know, I think the visuals of space sci-fi tend to be cooler in films, and that's something I really enjoy. I don't know, maybe I haven't read enough books in this genre to decide, really. But overall in this book, I absolutely love the exploration into existentialism and the absurdity of life. I also quite enjoyed the British humour, but I'm not sure this may vibe with everyone, especially with people outside the UK. But I'm just not the biggest fan of space sci-fi. I don't really seem to gel with it. There are actually 4 other books in this series, but I don't think I'm going to be picking them up. This was enough for me. Circling back to Black History Month, I wanted to read more on Black history next because I want to educate myself more on the struggles that Black people have faced in history. So the next book I read was Homegoing by Gyasi. This is an incredibly powerful novel, and it was one whose format that I've actually never read before. We start off with 2 half-sisters from Ghana, and we essentially follow each one of their descendants over 300 years. So each chapter would start with a new person, and it would go from one sister's side to the next, and it would just carry on going like that for many generations. The book explores the transatlantic slave trade with the impact this had on families and descendants, both in Ghana and in America, heavily focusing on themes of colonialism, racism, and the cultural dislocation across generations. And I rated this book 4.5 stars. I absolutely love this book. I thought it was utterly fantastic. I mean, just look at my sticky notes in here. I just adored it. It just taught me so much about the horrors of slavery and how this has impacted so many generations across the world, and how this still continues to affect people today, even though slavery was abolished a long time ago. And my education of what I was taught about slavery in school is so shockingly limited. So to read a book like this was so eye-opening because it just showed me so much of what I didn't know, and the monstrosities that the UK had a part to play in when it came to slavery. Because as we know, the UK was the OG colonizers. And it goes without saying that this is a deeply moving and heavy book. You read each character's story and your heart just breaks every single time for every one of them. And the trauma just gets passed down and down again and again, and you think, surely it cannot get any worse for the next generation, and surprise, it does. And this generational storytelling was just such a clever writing choice from the author, because it shows the vast impact that slavery had over such a long time. And it also had this running thread throughout of these striking meditations from the characters where they realised that none of them truly felt like they were home, which I think is so relatable to readers today who are migrants in any capacity. The idea that you're an outsider in your new place, but you are also no longer a resident in your old one, feels like you're in limbo. It kind of feels like you never really fit anywhere. At least this is how I personally feel. The only thing that stopped me rating this 5 stars, which is a common issue I find in multi-generational stories, were that there were just too many side characters. I just could not keep track of them all. And trying to remember and place them in the story honestly kind of took me out of reading it. Like, a main character's random friend who was a child 3 chapters ago is then brought back as an adult with no context, and you just need to remember who they are. And like, look at this family tree at the start. Like, all these people have individual chapters. So imagine having multiple side characters for each person here. It's just a lot to remember. Not saying you can't have a lot of characters, that's fine, but at least please try and jog my memory in who they are, because you're overestimating my memory skills. But apart from that, an absolute stunning, gorgeous, and excellent book, and one that I would recommend to anyone wanting a starting place to learn about Black history. And finally, the last book I read last month was by another Black author, and that's If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. This is a love story that's set in 1970s Harlem, New York, and we follow a 19-year-old Black woman whose fiance has just been wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. In the story, she and her family fight for his freedom whilst also being pregnant with his child. And it's a depiction of the corrupt legal system against African Americans, whilst also showcasing the struggles of having a young Black love during this era. It explores themes in injustice, systemic racism, and resilience. And I rated this book 5 stars, which was an incredible book to to end the month on. Firstly, James Baldwin, what the hell? I am still crashing out from reading this. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that he is literally one of the best writers of all time. I'm actually at a loss for words to describe how great this is. Firstly, the writing itself is so beautiful and lyrical. Like, I literally felt like I was reading poetry. Each word placed where it is feels so intentional and meaningful, and it was carefully decided to be put there. It is truly magical to read something where you feel like you've never seen that being done before. His ability to capture emotion and for you as a reader to feel it too is absolutely crazy, especially to capture this feeling of young love that feels so real and tender and innocent. Like, I fell in love with these characters as well, purely from just the way that they were written. And of course, most obviously, what Baldwin is known for doing best. His powerful social commentary on issues of race is just absolutely unparalleled. This book is such a deep dive into systemic racism and wrongful incarceration, as well as the continuing struggles that Black families still face in America today. One of the things I particularly love about him is that he just captures the dynamic between certain groups so well, whether it be man or woman, or Black man with a white man, or Black women together. He writes about it in a way where he explores the psychology and dynamics of the group, but also like you're experiencing it yourself, even though you've never gone through it yourself. Like, that is just truly incredible writing. I love Giovanni's Room and I Am Not Your Negro, but honestly, this book was just on a whole other level and I am obsessed. I literally read this in a day because I could just not put it down. Like James Baldwin, I would literally read your shopping list. And those were all the books that I read in February. Have you read any of these books? And if so, what did you think of them? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't read any of these, let me know what books you did read in February. And like with my last monthly reading wrap up, I'm now going to tell you a little bit about my month personally. Like with January, I also find February a difficult month to get through as it's just so cold and depressing. But this February actually felt okay. I felt like it started to get noticeably lighter, which my vitamin D deficient body greatly needs as I haven't seen the sun for about 6 months. And also good news, I finally found a lovely girl to replace my flatmate who is moving out, which I am so relieved by because this was severely stressing me out in January. I also got my first haircut of the year, which was well needed because my split ends were out of control. And as it's still freezing in London right now, there's not really much to do apart from dinners and drinks. So I caught up with various friends over the past months at new restaurants and bars that I wanted to check out. I would recommend Beasley, which is a intimate bar that's tucked away in Soho, which does really nice drinks and very nice hot dogs. I also visited back home in York for my mum's birthday, which was very much needed as it was the first time I was going back since Christmas and I would think I was getting a little bit homesick. My brother also lives in London, so it's really rare when all of us are back home together, so this was a really nice visit. I also had a sleepover with my friends where we watched Wicked, which was super fun. And that's kind of it. I kind of came back last week and all I did was pretty much read and work until making this video. I also saw a couple of new films, the first one being Small Things Like These, which I really loved and I thought it was an amazing book to film adaptation. I also finally watched The Substance, which I've been meaning to get around to for ages. I really enjoyed the first half. I think it was such a cool look into women in the industry and aging, but I think that the ending was a little bit too much for me. I was a bit like, whoa, at the end. And last night I also went to see Nosferatu, which was great. I genuinely adored all the actors and absolutely loved the gothic style of the film. And it's actually really inspired me to read Dracula, which is something I've never really been that bothered with, but I think this is going to be one of the reads that I get round to in Halloween time. And there we have it, team. That is my February wrap up. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like down below. It really means the absolute world to me. And if you're new here, please subscribe. I make new videos every single Tuesday yapping about books. And thanks to my returning subscribers that always watch my videos. I see you and appreciate you, and you are truly the real MVPs. Feel free to also follow me on Goodreads. I update there what I read in real time, and feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post books as soon as I finish reading them, letting you know what they're about and what I rate them out of 10. And thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!